Welcome to episode 6 of the Bagging Alaska Peaks podcast, the physical, mental, and spiritual journey of mountaineering. Today I sit down with a fellow service member and discuss her experience in climbing the highest peak in North America. Mikayla, an active duty maintenance officer in the United States Air Force, shares her journey in preparing for a Denali expedition and how dog food, out of all things, was her best friend when it came to weighted sled pulls during her training process. Additionally, Mikayla and I discussed some spiritual and mental roadblocks during the climb and how journaling became a very powerful tool for her and the success of the expedition. In fact, Mikayla reflects on one of her entries that described the environment she lived in for 19 days. And I quote, "This place is so cold, I wonder if hell exists." Episode 6, Denali, starts now. All right, Mikayla, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I know this has been, in my mind, kind of a long time in the making-ish, because I know you and I kind of linked up a while ago before you went on a big work trip, right? And then when you got back, we tried to link up. It didn't work out a few times, but We're finally here. So again, thanks for taking the time to chat about Denali today, the high one, which I'm really excited to get into. There's a lot that I want to cover in like this short amount of time. But before we get into that, the first time you and I linked up, actually, I reached out to you because my buddy and I, John, who's actually on my climbing team for 2026, he sent me this article with you, and it was actually a pretty sick photo. I hope you have this photo like hanging up in your
I do
in your house, because it's a photo of you. Like half of your body is in your military gear, and then half of it is the mountaineering gear as well. And I thought that was super, super epic photo. But anyway, I reached out to you specifically for some programs that the military has to help out with maybe getting some time off for climbing and all that. So that's literally how you and I first met. And I ended up just reaching out to you and getting some info. So thanks for supporting those questions, and of course, supporting the podcast as well, being on today. But like I said, we're featuring Denali today, and I've said this a few times in previous episodes where I kind of give like the guests the free reign of like picking a peak, of figuring out which peak they want to feature and talk about. And I remember you texted me back and said, "How about Denali?" And initially I was like, I don't know that I want to go that big that quick, right? Because we're recording episode 6 today. And then I thought about it for a bit, and I was like, you know what, let's just send it, because I have a feeling I'll be doing episodes on Denali, probably a few, because I feel like although a lot of the elements that are discussed with Denali are going to be the same, the experience is going to be completely different. So you're the first one talking about Denali today, so I'm pretty excited. If you can't see her right now, she's like waving her hands up, getting all pumped up. So like I said, a lot to talk about, so I'm going to quit yapping away. And if you could just spend a few minutes letting myself and the listeners know where you came from, where you grew up, what brought you here to Alaska, your relationship to climbing, and how that's evolved from when you started up until now.
Awesome. Well, once again, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to be here. I'm actually a military brat, so I was born in Arizona, but I grew up primarily in Germany. And then I wound up graduating from a high school in Texas. So I say I'm a pseudo-Texan. I'm not a fan of any other football teams or anything like that. But I do go home to Texas for Christmas. And I'm an aircraft maintenance officer, so I get to travel around quite a bit when we go TUI, which I'm really fortunate to do. And I made a great friend from Spain. He's actually from Washington, and I went out to visit him one year, and I was flying over, and I'm seeing all the mountains out there in Washington. And then one day, Hillary Nelson popped up on my Instagram feed as a suggested account that I follow.
Yeah.
And it was a picture actually from the plane of Mount Rainier, and she said, "This is where I started." And she's, this famous mountaineer skier. And in my mind, I was like, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And immediately it had to be done. So I climbed Rainier. And while I was climbing Rainier, I had this awesome guide, Nikki, and she was talking about her very first summit ever. She actually majored in climbing in college, which I didn't know you could do.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. I was like, wow, that's awesome.
If I could go back, I'd probably do that.
Right? And her first mountain ever was Denali. And I was like, what the heck? And at that time, I had orders to Alaska, so I moved up here via the military. And to climb Denali through RMI, who I go through for guided programs, you have to have summited a glaciated peak over 14,000 feet, and you had to do like one of their training camps, like a 10-day expeditionary training seminar, essentially, out in the mountains. And then they'll let you climb Denali. And she was like, yeah, you're already halfway. And so in that moment, I was like, oh, shoot, I'm already halfway to qualifying to like get on Denali, and I'm moving up there. And so it kind of developed this like goal list for me of like, why not start with like the bigger ones and go down, as my, body ages and my knees start giving out, then I'll just do like, smaller mountains when I'm old. Totally backwards mentality. So then it kind of became my next big goal to get after Denali, and I can actually see Denali from like the gas station right next to my house. So it's kind of been taunting me for the last 4 years. But yeah, so I don't know. I'm not somebody that particularly enjoys torturing myself, and I think that's a lot of what climbing is.
Yeah, it is.
But I love the reflection and the challenge, and like kind of the growth you get forced to have when you're climbing, and I love the accomplishment. So that was kind of my drive from there, and so yeah.
I like how you talk about the drive. What drives you to climb, right? And we're going to get into that too, kind of towards the end after we talk about the peak. But what part of Germany did you live in for a while?
I was in Spangdahlem.
Okay,
so it's south west.
Yeah. You said your parents were military, is that what you said? Okay.
Yes.
So your dad or mom was
both.
Both of them were Air Force?
Yes.
Okay. Were they both maintenance?
My dad was. My mom was PA.
Okay.
So
nice.
A funny mix of the two.
Yeah. I've been to Spang a few times. It's a pretty cool spot out there. But yeah, so yeah, talking about Rainier. Rainier's an interesting peak too, although we're not necessarily featuring that one today. But how did you enjoy climbing Rainier?
It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
Really?
I was
at that time, yeah.
At the time, it was my first mountain, and I was living in North Texas while I was training for it, and so I like exclusively used the stair stepper, and I had absolutely no right to be on that mountain with how I ended up training for it. But it was a big wake-up call for me, and how much more serious I need to be if I was going to make this a passion. But yeah, it was my hardest summit day to date.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing to say because I was so ill prepared for it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, heck, a lot of people can do that in a weekend, right? Did you end up doing it in a weekend?
2 days. Yep, that's all it takes. And I was very thankful to have some guides out there.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, my buddy and I are actually doing Rainier this June.
Awesome.
So we'll go out there and knock that one out too. So, well, awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing kind of a quick brief background of why you got started and why you continue to climb. So it's good to hear. Again, I've mentioned it before in some previous episodes, but probably one of my favorite pieces of talking to folks is kind of getting to know them and where they came from and all that good stuff. So again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot to talk about with Denali, and we probably won't even get to we're going to hit the surface, and that's about it for Denali today. But so let's go ahead and get into chatting about it. I think the first few questions I have for you for Denali, if you don't mind spending a few minutes on that, is preparation for Denali, right? Maybe not necessarily the physical prep, but more or less like logistical prep and how you guys ended up doing that, which it sounds like since you went guided, you probably didn't have your hands in a whole lot of that, I would imagine, or maybe you did. But if you can spend a few minutes talking about like the logistical prep of Denali, like the gear, the food you had to prep, transportation, etc.
Yeah. So for the gear, the guide company gave me, a big list of gear to get and make sure that I train with and I'm familiar to use. So much gear. At the time, I did rent like 3 or 4 pieces of it because how often am I going to need an avalanche transceiver? But then just getting familiar with that gear and moving around with it. When we showed up to Talkeetna, we were told to come with about 22 pounds of food. So that was going to be, that's 22 pounds. That's like our lunches for every day. And by lunch, I don't mean like an actual lunch. I mean, if you're climbing for 8 hours, every hour you're going to take a break and you need to be consuming at least 200 calories. So
Yeah.
that's like all these small snacks like candy and chips and anything you want to eat, because you don't want to eat at altitude. Your body just doesn't want to. So it's really awesome because it's trash food and it's delicious. And then the guides will come with, pasta and, these easy light meals. And then we split all of that up. So when you're going guided, in this case, we had X amount of weight and we split it all between the 12 climbers. So we're all carrying tent pieces. We're all carrying, the buckets that we're going to go to the bathroom in and all this stuff split. And then when we would stop for the night, they were responsible for making the breakfast and the dinner. So I really just had to eat my, gummy worms in the breaks and stuff like that. And then they made the food when it came to that. So the guide piece was a real valuable for me because just the training and the time it took to prepare physically, I knew that I didn't have like the time, like the spare time in my personal life to also do that huge logistical piece. So anyone that goes unguided, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm impressed and you're so much braver than me because I could not.
Yeah. That's what I was going to ask was, what was your decision? What was behind the decision of going guided versus non? And it sounds like just the time.
Yeah, and it was such a jump to go from Rainier to Denali. Any of the books you read or, the things, articles online and stuff, it's like Denali's not a joke. I love my life. I'm not trying to risk it.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't qualified to go out there by myself. And, the guides that they have, if you look up statistics about who's actually summiting, Denali has like a 50% success rate just based on weather alone.
Yep.
But of the people that do summit, it's like 80% are guided and then it's like 30% are unguided. And that really scared me just because of how financially big of a decision this was. Mm-hmm. It's not cheap to get out there. I mean, and it shouldn't be because it is such a dangerous endeavor. But I was like, I want to give myself the best chance at summiting. And so that was where I wasn't qualified and I wanted the best chance at summiting in summary.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I'm sure a lot of people have that same perspective, which is really smart. So, and I know there's tons of guides out there. Why'd you end up going with the one you went with? Did you just do research and found one, or did you have any recommendations?
Yeah, so I had already been through RMI on Rainier.
Okay,
and then
that's right.
I did have to, I did a 10-day training seminar out on Ruth Glacier where we attempted to climb Mount Dickey. And so I actually got to go on Denali with a couple people that I knew already because there was one fellow climber that had gone on the training expedition and then one of the guides was someone from that group as well. And so it just made me feel a lot more comfortable to go. Of the 12 people, I already knew 2 of them, which was nice.
Okay. Yeah, super cool. Yeah, that's good to hear. That you had a good experience with some guides out here. So like I said, there's tons of them. So well, good. Let's go ahead and let's talk about your trip, right? As I mentioned, tons that I want to get through. And I want to try to go through this in a very systematic, deliberate way in terms of the camps that you hit to eventually attempting to get to the summit, right? Because I know for a lot of listeners, if they're not familiar with Denali, there's a very deliberate route, right? And obviously the primary, more common route is what you took, right? The West Buttress, which is very common. There's one other route, I think, is it Casson Ridge?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. But yeah, West Buttress. And a lot of the numbers that I'll use today are coming from Denali's West Buttress Climber's Guide from Colby Coombs, which is a pretty well-known dude. So those are the numbers that I have. So if you can go ahead and start talking about really the approach of getting to Denali, essentially base camp and like where you started at, which I assume is probably you started in Talkeetna, flying out and then getting to base camp, and then we'll kind of go from there?
Yep. So we all gathered in Talkeetna and had like our gear day where we kind of assimilated and weighed everything. And then we actually got, I think we had a couple weather days, because unless, Kahiltna Glacier's ready to be, is open, you're just not getting on. So we ended up flying out. And we were fortunate. We got to start like pretty much the second we landed, which is about 7,000 feet. So your first day, you're actually kind of going down for like the first part, and then you have this like very slight incline. You're hardly gaining like any altitude the first day, and you're going for like 7 miles. But those 7 miles actually really suck because one, it's your first day, you really don't know most of these people, and it's like the heaviest you're going to be for the entire trip.
Yeah.
You haven't eaten any of the food. All the propane tanks have, it's just so. It's an average. I think I was carrying between my sled and my pack. I think I had roughly 100 pounds.
Yeah,
on
makes
average,
sense.
it's like 100 to 120. And that's something that's nice about going with a larger team too, is you can split all that gear up.
Yep.
Those smaller teams going with like 3 or 4 people are definitely carrying more gear to start. And so that was day one. And then the next day we went up to Cache. So the beautiful thing about Denali is that you're not climbing the mountain just once. You are leapfrogging up this creature, unfortunately. So
you almost climb it twice, it seems like, right?
Twice. Yeah. So he hasn't said it yet, but I did not actually get to summit Denali, unfortunately. But I think I tallied it once, and it was like we had climbed a total of like 19,000 feet, which would not equal a summit on Denali either way. But the amount of up and down you do, and that's strictly based off the weight. So the next day we went to like 10.5, and we cached a bunch of stuff that you would not need till summit day. So that's snacks, foods, like all sorts of like your heavy mittens and your parka and all the stuff you don't need at lower altitude.
Yeah.
And then we got weathered in. So right from the get, we are getting like smacked with weather. 2023 was the worst year to climb. It had the lowest summit rate since 1972.
Really?
It was a historic year. I think it had like a 30% success rate. There were about 1,000 climbers, and only like 300 and some change made it. So
interesting.
It was a bear of a year. So we spent an extra day down on the Kahiltna. Then you go to 11. Then you go back down to 10.5. Then you go back to 11. Then you go to 14. And so it's like this just back and forth. So we went up to 11,000 feet, and the next day we went back down to get our cache.
Is that Motorcycle Hill? Is that 11?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, yes, all these little, they look little. They're not little. Because you got to keep in mind you're carrying a sled. And I had done some climbing at this point, but I had never, like, I used the sled for training, of course, but I really got smacked in the face with the sled and how to move with it and move on a team. And all of my training was, just me out in the field.
Yeah.
Or me trying to get this sled, I put dog food in it as my weight,
Nice.
Really cowboying it up, looking like a goofball on the trail. Yeah, I don't walk my dogs. I do walk my dog food though.
Nice.
Kidding. I do walk my dogs. But yeah, so this is the first time, like you really have to know how to like move with these people at a pace. We had a couple people that were in their 60s. We had a guy that was, younger than me, but a lot of people in their 40s, and like all walks of life, nobody truly knows each other, and you're trying to like do this synchronized thing. So people are dropping their AirPods and they're dropping their gloves, and we stop, and now we got to pick up momentum, and it's really.
And a lot of you guys are roped up, I assume,
yes.
in some cases, right?
So
yeah, that's got to be really
the whole time you're roped up. Like 100% of the time, unless you're at a camp and, you've gone around with your super long stick to make sure there's no crevasse, you are tied to these people and you're tied to their sleds. So it's like you're moving and then you're pulling this sled, which just makes the logistics of it, the first few days are goofy.
And yeah, that's really interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's the dynamic there has to be completely different. Because I assume you guys didn't train prior to like with this group, right?
No,
Yeah.
no,
So
not at all.
yeah, that's interesting because I know with my team we're going unguided, but like we're going to spend a year training and right figuring out that movement process, especially when you're roped up, right? So
For
yeah, it's
sure.
interesting you brought that up. That had to have been pretty frustrating, but at the same time, you got to almost expect that if you're not going to train together.
Yeah, yeah. And I should have expected it. And I just didn't even think about it. And then there's 12 of us. And so there's 3 rope teams. So you're changing people every day,
Yeah.
right? Like you might not be on the same rope team that you were yesterday or 2 days before. So, um, just interesting. And everything you're doing, you're trying to do incredibly quickly. So you climb for an hour and then you sit down and you have to put on your parka and put on sunscreen and drink water and eat food and take it all back off and pack it all back up. And, developing some sort of system for that took me a few days just to, get in and out to make sure that I had enough time to actually rest in these like 10-minute breaks.
Yeah.
And I was going through my journal entries last night, and one of my hardest days on Denali was when we were at 11,000 feet, and we went back down to like 10,500 to get our cache and come back up. And it was one of my hardest days. Like you'd think it was like a 3-hour day. It was like it should have been so easy. And that's where like the mental game like really came into play for me. Like you can be super physically fit, but if you are not mentally prepared to like handle yourself on your bad days when everyone else is having a good day, like that'll like really mess with your head.
Yeah, I
and
bet.
so I was lucky to kind of learn that lesson earlier on, but definitely it wasn't something that I expected. Yeah, I was like had the biggest pity party in my tent. I'm like, what is wrong? Like this was like 5,000 or 500 feet. Like what the heck?
Yeah, just hit a wall, huh? Kind
Yeah.
of mental wall there for a minute, but did you guys I don't know if you mentioned it. Did you I assume you didn't use skis. You guys just okay. I know a
No.
lot of people ski Denali.
That looks like a much more fun way to do it. On the way up, we had a couple guides that use skis.
Yep.
Which is great until you have like 30-mile-an-hour gust of wind that takes your sled and flips it.
Yeah.
And just flips it
That's a good
100
point.
times. And then you are now in the position to unflip it in your skis. And I watched that happen a few times with one of my guides, and I was like, oh my God, this is why I'm paying you, because I could not. Like,
Yeah, see, I didn't think about that. I mean, it makes sense, but yeah, that'll be interesting. Okay, so kind of backing up just a little bit. So you guys started at Talkeetna.
yes.
Got some good gear, organization going on. You guys flew out to base camp, which is Hilton Base Camp, right? Which is what 72 is what I have,
Yes.
about 7,200, and then you literally get dropped off. Then you start raging, right, to the next camp, right? Okay.
Yep.
Because I thought I saw some photos of people setting up tent like at base camp there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if some people go there and they like spend the night there, then get up the next morning and do it. But
Yeah, it all depends when you fly on. We flew on about 9 o'clock, so we have
okay,
plenty of time
yeah,
to move
that makes sense.
day. But if your weather window is like at 4 or something like that, I wouldn't imagine you'd start that day.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yeah. So you guys pretty much went from base camp to what camp did you guys hit next? Did you guys go straight to just Ski Hill? Did you guys go?
I think it's Ski Hill. Yeah, I think it is Ski Hill. The first camp, if you will, doesn't truly have a name until you get to like 11,
Okay.
14, and they start like numbering them.
Gotcha.
I think it was though. And then there's Motorcycle Hill.
Yep.
I think I'm getting the two flipped in my head.
Yeah, Motorcycle Hill. I'm showing at 11. And again, this is all based off of again Colby Coombs' book here, but 11,000 Motorcycle Hill.
Yes.
Okay. Sweet.
So you camp at the bottom of Ski Hill, and then you move up to and then your next day is your cache day, and then you move up to 11K, which is at the base of Motorcycle Hill.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which once again, when you first get there, you're like, oh my gosh, that hill's intimidating, but it's nothing compared to the hill that comes after it.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. No.
Well, good segue into what comes next, right? So after Motorcycle Hill, after about 11,000, what's next?
After that, you are faced with this like 2,000-foot wall which also includes the fixed lines.
Yep.
And that'll be that's 14. So you're at 14 camp. And that's where you're going to acclimate. And I must add, the weather is really the worst part of this whole experience. At 11K, we spent like 3 or 4 days there. 3 of which were unplanned days because we were waking up to like feet of snow.
Nice.
And our posh, which is where we ate all our food and played games while we were waiting and stuff, had fallen, and our bathroom situation had caved in. It was terrible. It was like, I have this video where like it's so loud, you can't imagine how loud it is, and just for days it's just all you hear is wind and tent noise, and you're not seeing the sun, and it is summertime in Alaska. So your brain is like, where is that sun?
Yeah.
So we busted out of that. When I got to the top of Motorcycle Hill, I was like super proud of myself because it looked so intimidating at first. And then that's when like this crazy wind hit. And I remember like having this out of body experience, like, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. And one of the guides, thank God for Jack, he like put his hands on my shoulder and like screamed at me. He was like, "You're fine. It's just wind."
Yeah.
And like he had to like shake me like back into consciousness. And then it got a lot better after that. But like for a second, I was like, I don't belong here. I need to go home. Like it was terrifying.
Now is this Windy Corner that you're talking about?
No.
At all? No. Okay.
That was the weird thing. So just as he said, right after this is Windy Corner. And Windy Corner wasn't windy. We dealt with all the wind, thankfully. And this was like the first time too, right after Motorcycle Hill, where we had like sheer ice, so we weren't on snow anymore. And so it was the first moment where I was like, yeah, so your life is at risk. This, you filled out that high risk worksheet for a reason. This is why you filled out that worksheet. But we got to 14K and life was good. And then we spent 9 days at 14,000 feet.
Holy cow.
So I got to know everybody super well.
I bet.
And that was one of those where we really started to realize, like, you are not the one climbing Denali. Denali is like letting you climb her. Like, we got up there and we were going to spend 3 days to acclimate. And day 2, there was a weather window. So almost every single team at 14K left to shoot this window.
Yeah.
And our guides were like, nope, we're going to stay put because there's another window in like 5 days. And I was like, oh my
Were there a lot of other teams out there?
There were.
Yeah. Okay.
There were. I can't think of a good number. It's such a big space. There were so many tents, a lot of independent teams.
Yeah.
And everybody shot this window except us and a couple other groups that had just previously arrived. And we sat and waited for this window that might not come, Now,
what was their rationale? Did they just want to wait for that window because they didn't want to go when everyone else was going because it was going to be crowded, or what? We
weren't acclimated yet.
Okay. Gotcha.
So they wanted to make sure that we had a good 3 days, which looking back was, at the time I was like, oh man, like this is it. We got to go. But we were not prepared. Like we were dealing with like lightheadedness and like just muscle fatigue and you name it. Like something that a lot of the guided teams do is like during their acclimation time, they'll go and they'll do these short hikes. So in that 9 days we did do a test run up that 2,000-foot monster of a wall, and we practiced with the fixed lines and really got acclimated. So we all felt a lot better day on our summit attempts day. But when I tell you I was bored, my gosh, and I'm in the military, so I wasn't having any extracurricular fun, if you know what I mean. But a lot of other people, what else are you gonna do? So they're just freaking we made this chessboard with this like piece of like, it was like a pad that you'd put like a pot on so you didn't melt the snow. And we used duct tape and we made a chessboard out of it, and we were using like candy and medicine and edibles and like weird stuff to make this chessboard, and like we were all playing on it for like like there was like 20 people in this like 8-person posh, because we were so bored. Oh my
Nobody
gosh.
brought any cards or anything on
I
this
mean,
trip?
oh yeah, we played a lot of euchre as
Yeah.
well. But gosh, I don't even a lot of naps. I ran out of my Netflix downloads. I didn't bring a Kindle or anything. That's one thing
Yeah.
I would definitely bring next time is
Yeah, a
yeah,
few
so
books, yeah.
I was bored, and you're just sitting there like, will I get to achieve this big goal?
Mhm.
Who knows? Like, let's just sit and
Yeah.
so it was.
That's got to play a lot on your mind too, which I'm excited to talk about that piece too here shortly. Did you find that process fun at any point? So obviously being bored is a different story, but getting to know these people, like did you find that process really interesting and fun, really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There were so many people from like, like I said, it is a financial burden to take these really big climbs on. And so we had like doctors and, CEOs and attorney, like all these like super smart people. And just coming from all like walks of life. One of my tent mates, Lenhart, he's got like a doctorate in like some very specific like time period of like poetry or something like that, like just
Yeah.
it's so many different like thoughts about life and opinions and how they train and where they came from. So it was fun, but after a while, like day 7 and day 8, there was a lot less talking and a lot more just like
Yeah.
hanging out in your own tent, listening to your own music, because I think everyone was just getting a little antsy. But
Yeah, I'm sure after a while too. You just want to be away from people at some point. So
oh yeah,
seeing the same faces every day in a small space too,
no,
which can be interesting.
absolutely no alone time. Like, and if you like, maybe you are alone in your tent, but you're still hearing people right outside of it. The bathroom situation sucks. Like, so you really gotta dig deep to
Yeah,
find your
yeah,
own peace.
yeah. I bet. I bet. How did it feel seeing all of those other teams shoot up and you guys staying back?
It was nerve-wracking.
Yeah,
I think a lot of us, like, in my mind, I was like, hey, like, Mikayla, this is what you paid the guides to do. You paid them to make this decision.
yeah, and trust them.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, and weather had been such a question mark on this whole trip that I think we all went out there trying to, like, keep in touch with the reality of the situation. Not many people had summited at that
Yeah,
point, and I was climbing in June, so we were already at the end of the, season. So we were all trying to just keep her cool and like let the guides do their thing. And decision was out of our control, so just
right.
left it at that.
Nice. Well, cool. So y'all's weather window, I assume, finally came,
It did.
right?
It finally came, and all the teams that had arrived when we did, we moved up. And so yeah, the first like wall that I keep speaking of, which involves the fixed lines, we got to the top of that in about 3 hours. And then after that, like I was just freaking gassed, and the team was gassed, and people started reporting that they were dizzy,
Mm,
and like, people that had never asked for an extra break on, to this point were asking for an extra break. So like the altitude was definitely like, this is the real, the real game. And
where
something
where were you guys at what altitude at this point?
this would have been like the highest I got was like 16.8. So this would have been like
Okay.
16.4, 16.5, something like that.
Okay. So is this kind of head wall, ridge camp? Does that ring a bell at all? Any of those points?
It was just before Washburn's Thumb.
Okay. Yeah.
That's where we ended up calling it. And my fear, because I'm like looking around and I'm feeling the same way that everyone else is feeling, but as only one of 2 women on this trip, I was like, I'm not gonna blow the whistle. I'm not tired. And so I'm like looking around at everyone. I'm like, get it together. The guys are gonna, cancel our summit just because we're
Yeah.
weak, and we're not. And then slowly, like one by one, we ended up perching. We could see Washburn's Thumb like maybe 200 feet away, and we stopped for like an hour. And a bunch of the guide teams, like the guides had started like talking to each other. One team went on, and so I was like, surely they're stopping us because we're weak. And then sure enough, like we made the call to go back down for avalanche conditions. The snow was like waist deep. It was real goofy up there. Um, the wind wasn't helping us, like, and we made it back down to 14, and like an hour later that team that had passed us came back. Nobody ended up.
Oh wow.
Nobody
Okay.
on that window made it to 17, unfortunately. So it did, in some regard I was like, okay, nobody made it, we're good. But in other regards it was like, man, like we all sat here for a week and a half and waited for this window. But I don't think anyone made it on that first window either.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
That's
so
what I was going to
it
ask.
was just a crapshoot, like.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it was, yeah, on the way down I had to like really like reckon, with my like, how much had I tied my self-worth to climbing this mountain? Because in reality it was like 2.5 years in the making.
Yep.
I climbed Rainier in 21 and did the training expedition in 22, and this was 2023. I got knee surgery for this. I quit smoking for this. I didn't go to 5 weddings because I needed to leave.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I had really put a lot of my life on hold just for this, and I didn't make it.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, so that like walk back down, I say walk, that climb back down to 14K, I shed a couple tears, and there's actually a photo of me like with my thumb up. If I have goggles on, and I am crying in this photo, but you can't. I look like the happiest. I'm like smiling. I look like a little peach.
Yeah.
But and then after that, I very quickly got over it. I was like, you know what? Like this was still important, and this was still very big, and I did my best, and I don't think that I wouldn't have made it because of how I trained, and that's really the box that I was concerned about.
Yeah,
like,
good point.
could I do this? And I think that I could if the mountain had allowed that year. And so looking to climb Denali later this year, like there's so much pressure that's been taken off of me of like, am I answering a question of like, can I make it? I don't think I'm doing that this time. It's like, I just want to go out there and be on that mountain. And if I summit, then I get to summit. And if I don't, like, I'll try again, shoot. Like, and so I'm going into this training season. I'm like this, I just feel so much more at peace than I did in 2023.
Yeah, that's good. Are you, actually, I'll get to that here in a second. So the ultimate decision to turn around was just due to weather, right? Okay. Yeah. You guys made the call. Yeah. Like you said, that's got to be frustrating, but you've got to almost expect that, right? Doing something that big. Yeah. So you guys get back down. How long did it take you guys for the descent there?
So once you have given up on your summit, whether you summit or not, your next goal in life is to get off of that mountain as soon as possible. And we had spent so many weather days there, like, not that we were gonna run out of food, but we were not like eating, at this point we're eating like the bottom of the barrel. Like, we gotta go. So we got back down and we spent the night, and then at like 2 p.m. the next day, we left, and we really didn't stop. So we went from 14 down to 11, and we napped for like 3 or 4 hours. We set up tents and we napped for like 3 or 4 hours, and then we left again, which once again, we had the sun for dang near the whole day at this point. And we climbed through the middle of the night all the way out from 11K, straight out. So other than that like 3-hour nap, we were moving. And we were really fortunate because we got back. I say we climbed through the night. Like, it's like 2 a.m. You're like climbing. Now you're like, crossing the Kahiltna. You're on the Kahiltna again. And you just have these 2 walls of mountains on either side. And you're like delusional at this point because you're losing altitude. You just like, you kind of like wave to the summit, but you didn't actually get to like put your hand on it. You're like, what am I going to do next? Like, what does this mean for me? And you're climbing out. So it's like this very weird, like, I think I definitely was delusional. So we didn't get back to Kahiltna Base Camp where the runway is. I say runway, it's more like an airstrip.
Yeah.
Until like 5 a.m. And a lot of us had cached beer there. So we just started drinking. Nice. I'm just, chilling with these like blueberry like beers that Bad News can make, something like that, starting at 5 a.m. And it's just surreal. And I was so freaking like proud of myself. And what was really kind of sad was those people that shot the window like 7 days before us, they were still there on the Kahiltna because the weather was so bad they couldn't fly out.
Oh, wow.
So not only did they not summit, but then they sat there for like 7 days on
gross.
the Kahiltna in like 40-degree weather. So it was like raining on them. We got there, and by like 10 o'clock, we flew off.
Nice.
And that was why we moved so fast. We're like, hey,
Good
this
timing.
window that we would have used to summit is now our window to get the heck off of this freaking mountain. And so we were super fortunate in that we had same-day drop-off and start climbing and same-day arrival and leave.
Yeah, that's interesting. Man, if you can time it that way, that sounds pretty solid. Instead of having to sit there for an extra week or whatever it is. But cool. Then you guys flew back to Talkeetna, I assume, and then rolled out, huh?
Yep. And our little, we had a night there, and our hotel rooms weren't ready yet. And so we were like, disgusting. And we, went to lunch in Talkeetna, and we like so obviously look like we just got off the mountain. Our faces are like windburned, and we have these awesome sunburns. And like it was like we were celebrities because it's tourist season, and people are like taking pictures of us,
Oh, wow.
asking us, and it was pretty awesome. Just
start signing autographs and stuff.
Oh yeah, shoot, dang near. Like we got back to the hangar where we like laid all our stuff out, and there were like 2 tour groups going out just to like fly around the mountains. Yeah. And they were straight up taking photos of us. I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so cool.
Nice. Yeah, I think I remember seeing you putting some stuff up of like before and after photos.
Oh my gosh.
Which was pretty amazing to see, but because I'm sure that just drains you. I mean, that an expedition style climb like that just has to drain you when you're completely done. So total time, how long did that take you guys from the day you guys flew in until you guys got back? What was total?
It was 19 days.
Okay.
So yeah, I've heard of them as going as long as like 30, 31, something like that. The year before me, so 2022, there were guys summiting in 11 days because there was absolutely no snow. Like it was
I
the
bet.
perfect year. So I feel like we should have known. We should have looked at a farmer's almanac because and then we got rained on dang near every single day in Anchorage that whole summer. And that was all snow up there. Yep. So we should have seen it coming.
Yeah, you just never know. Yeah, some people get really lucky with those weather windows and some people unfortunately don't. But like you said, right, the mountain's gonna tell you when you can climb. It's not the other way around.
And that's what's I think amazing about Denali is that it's still like I did Aconcagua, for example, this past January, and it's like not that it's like you have mules bringing stuff up. Like you're having 3-course meals up until 14K. Like
nice.
I mean, it's like you have Wi-Fi. Starlink at every single camp aside from the last one. Like you were so connected. Denali is like truly expeditionary. What you go on is what you come off with. Like what you're eating, you're bringing your bathrooms off of this mountain. You are not talking to loved ones unless you have some satellite phone. Like you are out there, like, and you're in your little like skull-sized kingdom of a brain, just having to reconcile whatever you got going on by yourself, and that's really unique, I think, in today's day and age, at least with climbing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's the beauty of Denali and many other mountains out there, but being able to keep that. I wouldn't call it raw exploration, but it's a term I used during my last episode with a buddy. But yeah, you're right. I think it's cool and unique, and that you can have that these days. Well, cool. Let's talk. So thanks for sharing that. Again, just scratching the surface, right, on the experience there. But thanks for sharing those details. Hey, guys. First, I want to give a quick thanks to all of my current supporters, and also say welcome to the new listeners that have recently found the show. Since releasing this podcast last November, I've had some recurring questions come up from many listeners that I wanted to answer. A common question that has been brought up multiple times is, what was the motivation behind starting this podcast? And I love hearing this question because there is indeed very specific motivation behind starting this project. As many can relate to, during solo climbs, all you have time to do is think. So during a lot of those climbs, I found myself revisiting this plan in my head of how cool it would be to sit down and talk with folks that enjoyed challenging themselves and climbing peaks in one of the most beautiful places in the world. After thinking it over for a while, I quickly realized the opportunity was there to not only connect and engage with local climbers and mountaineers, but hopefully inspire people at the same time through those conversations. I also discovered there were many climbing podcasts already established. However, all of them either focused primarily on the training aspect or interviewed and featured big-name sponsored athletes within the climbing community. Additionally, a podcast that focused just on Alaskan peaks did not exist. Although these shows are absolutely incredible in their own way, I felt as though I had the need and opportunity to capitalize on providing a show that featured Alaskan climbers and mountaineers of all levels. So this past October, I was on a work trip in the lower 48 and spent a long weekend in a cabin in Tennessee. I actually had plans to do some hiking that weekend. However, I ended up staying inside that cabin the entire weekend to develop a podcast outline. And the Bagging Alaska Peaks podcast was born. Again, I appreciate all the support so far during this process and look forward to many more conversations. Let's bag some more peaks. So let's talk, you kind of already mentioned a few of them probably, but were there any like major lows that you would, or even highs and lows that you would want to talk about during your 19 days out there? I know you kind of already alluded to a few of them, but anything else that kind of sticks out?
Yeah. I don't think, other than like that one day where I expected myself to perform on an easy day and I didn't, I don't think I had a lower day than that. And then, yeah, just probably there were a couple times where I was like second in line between, the first guide. And so, we were trail breaking with so much fresh snow. We were constantly having to break trail.
Yeah.
And so days where I was, up front for that, I was super proud of myself. And then, yeah, just the climb out and being so at peace. I really thought that I was going to have to like rebuild my identity if I didn't summit. I have like these journal entries where I'm like, who are you if you are not, a Denali summiter? And so to be so proud of myself, that was a really high moment for me, like physically coming down off the mountain, but like knowing that in my heart, at least, that I still did something like worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a shock to me, but probably one of the best moments.
Yeah, awesome. What would you say? So that low that you kind of mentioned, kind of the easier days, if you will, what would you chalk that up to have been? Like just a mental breakdown, or a combination of mental and physical breakdown, or what do you think?
I think it was physical and I think it was both, like you said. Physical because it was still on like the newer days, and I don't think that when you pack your backpack and your sled, you really got to like figure out what your, concoction of that is, whether you want a heavier pack or a heavier sled.
Yeah.
And I kind of rushed myself when I was packing the sled because we were picking stuff up from the cache. So I just kind of willy-nilly threw it in the sled. So my sled was super heavy and and it wasn't weighted right. And so that was a big learning thing physically. And then the mental side, I think I needed to get over comparing myself to other people. Everybody like came trotting into camp and they're just smiling and they're wanting to, play a card game or something. And I'm like, why are they there and I'm here? And so to kind of, I was reading my journal entry about this, and it's like, hey, like you're not them and they have bad days too. Like,
yeah.
And that's where you need to leave it, dude. Like, get it together. Now It's time to get it together. And then we had like 3 snow days in a row. So I had plenty of time to recoup and everything. So, but yeah, just not comparing yourself to the people around you. And of course, it's hard because everyone's talking about how they trained and what they've already climbed. And, just so much skill there. There was a guy that was like, yeah, I just climbed the Matterhorn. And he ended up not doing that well on this climb. And then we had a guy that was like, yeah, I climbed on the stair stepper for 4 hours with a 60-pound pack. And I'm like, oh crap, like I think my max was like 2 hours, like shoot, and so it's like kind of a natural human tendency to be like, oh, what did they do that I haven't? Yeah. And so now when I go out, I'm like, okay, I've been on Denali, I've been on Aconcagua, I live in Alaska, and I feel like I just have, but at that time it was like, I've climbed Rainier, which is a 2-day climb, and like that's all I got going for me. So I felt really behind the power curve.
Yeah, it's interesting. which actually leads me into kind of the next portion of this on the back end is, so after talking about the peak, right, I like to transition into talking about the physical, mental, and kind of spiritual piece of mountaineering in general or for your particular climb. And we've already hit on a lot of that stuff already. So I do want to ask you, because I think it's interesting, and I know a lot of people journal. How important do you think journaling out there was for you? And do you think your experience would have been completely different if you didn't do any of that?
Oh, well, I am an avid journaler.
Yeah.
So it was something that I especially wanted to do out there. At the time, I was like, conflicted about things at work and things in my relationships and stuff that I had given up to take on this climb. And I really thought like this climb is going to solve all my problems and I'm going to have some like, kumbaya moment out there. And that wasn't true at all. Like I came back with the same exact problems I
Yeah,
went
yeah.
on. But it's really interesting because I really just journal about my feelings. I don't journal so much about like exactly what happened during the day. But in this case, I did both. And I wrote multiple entries where I was like, hey, read this entry in a year. And I set an alarm on my phone. And so it was really cool to be able to look back and see like, hey, this is what you were thinking on Denali and where you thought your life might be and the questions. And I look back and I'm like, none of that even matters anymore. Like
Yeah.
everything's changed so much. And so just having that to compare like who I was then and what I prioritize and who I am now. And just being able to like flip back of like, I was like so dramatic in some of these journal entries. There's one thing I wrote. What was it? It was like, I wrote something like, this place makes me question if it's so cold it makes me question if hell is real. And then there's another one where it's like I shook hands
That's
with
deep,
death
man.
today or something like that. Like I was like really going through it.
That's funny.
So yeah, in that aspect it's kind of humorous. And then I did write I will never do this again, and now I'm like signed up to do it again in a few months. So I don't know. Maybe it's like having kids. You like have a kid and you're like, I'll never do that again. And then they, turn one. You're like, oh, you're so cute. Let's do it again. I don't know. But I think that's
a good one. I like it. I need your permission now to use that in the podcast or promoting it. Is that last entry you just made, which was this place is so cold. I question if hell is real. I like that one.
Oh yeah, that's
a good one.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, that's something that I would actually really like to get into is journaling. I haven't, but it's kind of neat to hear that from your perspective. And I think it's gonna be really neat for you too, which I'm sure you know, is taking that journal back with you during your second go. And kind of reading it, maybe traveling along the journal, if you will, day by day and seeing how you felt during push 1 versus push 2.
Oh, for
so
sure.
That'll be pretty neat to do. Well, cool. Anything else that you want to touch on for the physical, mental, or spiritual piece of climbing that you can think of? I know, again, we've already touched on some things already, but anything else that kind of speaks to you? What about I know I just cut you off probably, but what about the spiritual piece? And the reason I'm going to ask this one is because most people during the last few episodes don't talk about it. And I don't know if it's because, right, we have the stigma of anytime you hear spiritual, it's got to be about religion or whatever, which isn't the case, but maybe for some people. So what's the spiritual piece for you for climbing, if any at all?
Yeah. I think, something I think about a lot when I'm amongst big mountains where you're kind of like, wow, I'm this like very small speck of a thing and my life actually doesn't matter. Is like, what are we doing here? Like, what are we here for? Where's my purpose on this earth?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the songs that I listen to a lot, especially on the way out, oh gosh, I can't remember the name, but one of the lines is, we're all going to die trying to figure it out. And it felt like so very full circle for me. Like I mentioned earlier, like I came out there with like all these questions and this expectation that I would have it all solved by the time I got off. And so to leave and have this kind of be my chorus of like, you're not going to figure it out, dude. Like, that's not what this is about. Like this, and so I'm not the most spiritual person on the planet, but it is like a spiritual experience of like, why are we here?
Yeah.
Why is this important to me? What is my reason for being out here and doing this thing that makes absolutely no sense, to use your weave on?
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, and that's different for everybody, I imagine. But yeah, if you think you're gonna find answers on a mountain, you're not. Well, you might, but I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people go up there, searching for that stuff, and that's kind of their reasoning for climbing, or their spiritual piece for climbing. But
I think it can clarify things for you. Like when you
yeah,
break your life down to like a backpack and a bucket for a bathroom, and you gotta boil snow for water. You're like, okay, wait, what's like truly important to me? Like, who do I miss right now? Like, if
yeah,
I could like, I'm like miserable and it's cold and like it's just terrible here. What do I really, really want? And who would I want to see? And like, what creature comforts like do I need? And like, I was writing about it and it was like, if I could be anywhere right now, I'd be in my house, like dancing around with my dogs,
mm-hmm.
barefoot, and the sun is shining through every window. And like, and it just, I'd have a fire planned later and I'd be playing hockey, and it's just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
all these things of like, okay, like, this is who I am. This is like what I
yeah,
value in life. And so I think maybe it doesn't provide answers, but it can provide clarity in a way.
yeah, absolutely. It actually brings me back to, I can't remember what episode it was, but it was my buddy Andrew. We talked about Bellicose Peak, and one of his quotes that he said was, "Life is about contrast," and I thought that was very interesting. Right, so one of the reasons why he does it, right, is because sometimes, being in the convenience of your home next to a fireplace gets mundane after a while. You need to go up and be uncomfortable for a bit, and then
Right.
once you're up there for too long, it's nice to come back here. So life is about contrast, which I thought was interesting. Kind of um, correlates with what you were talking about, which was really neat.
I like that a lot.
Yeah,
And Denali, especially. I mean, and like anybody that goes out on no matter the duration, like something I like about climbing too is that like you're going up, right? And it's like, oh, you're kind of just focused on going up. And then if you stop and you look down, you're like, I can't get out of this. Like, I'm here and like, I can't get anywhere. Like, unless
yep,
I were, to like break my leg or something, they helicopter me off this thing. Like, like you really, like, there's so many things that you can do these days where it's just a ripcord and you're back to your
yep,
super comfortable, whatever it might be. But when you're climbing, it's like, no, you're going through it and you're going to stay going through it until you can mentally, like, or
yeah,
physically, and I like that. I like that challenge that there's no way to make it stop until you finish it,
yeah,
really.
absolutely.
So
Yep, interesting. I think that's why a lot of people are drawn towards it, which is really neat. Well, cool, Mikayla. I think really the last thing that I have, which I think we all know already, is what's next for you, and it's Denali push number 2, right?
yes, sir.
So when is that happening, and how are you doing it this time? Are you doing it with another guide? And I think you mentioned earlier, right? The same guide company,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I'm going through the same company, and I'm actually going with two of the guides that I climbed Aconcagua with last January.
Nice.
Um, and I'm doing it a lot differently. Same sort of training, but I'm starting a lot earlier. Last time I started like 2.5 months beforehand, which is not enough time.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not I mean, it is, but you're not gonna have a lot of fun. Um, and so this time I'm starting about 4 months out, which is actually like yesterday. So we're like really getting into training now. And I am going to do longer on the stair stepper. I don't think I'm going to do 4 hours with 60 pounds. I think that's too much. But yeah, so I've got this massive Excel sheet and I have written down every single day until I leave and what workout I'm going to do.
nice.
And it's really fun to nerd out on. I don't typically nerd out on Excel sheets, but this one I really do put a lot of love into it. And then yeah, we'll go from there.
Oh
So
yeah,
you see me out on the trail with a
yeah.
giant bag of dog
Dog
food.
food.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. Maybe I'll buy you some dog food and get you some more weight.
Oh yeah.
Um, but no, that's awesome. And yeah, hopefully round 2 for you before you leave Alaska will be a good one for you. So, but at the end of the day, if you don't summit, it's still pretty rewarding to do regardless. So, well, cool, Mikayla. I think that's really all I have. We've been talking for a bit. Really good discussion on Denali. And literally, this is the first time you and I have sat down and talked, and it went really well. I know you were a little hesitant of doing it, but I'm so glad you spent the time to chat about Denali today. And hopefully, you and I can maybe go do some climbing before you leave for Denali and leave the state. Do some climbing out here in Alaska before you roll out. So,
oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thanks again, Mikayla.
Of course.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a few minutes to subscribe, drop a comment, or leave a rating, as this helps support the project and reach other listeners. If you'd like to connect with other climbers, hikers, and mountaineers, consider joining the Mountaineering Club of Alaska. Additional information can be found on the website at mtnclubak.org. Original music has been provided by Emberloom. I am your host, Sean Cordes. Thanks for listening and safe climbing.